Hello, Black Americans, as formerly, but not to say that we're not this human volume science individual group species body of individual bodies distinctly so we could see where and how it's making more of itself in individual volume, debatable or not. There are things that are not debatable, like roles with a breaching method state, with regarding standing impositions upon people, let alone logistically, let alone black. Everyone's sickly distinctly, to keep how sickly not distinctly from being overcome. To use Martin Jr.'s phrase, Martin Luther King, to overcome because we have the Constitution abridged. And who could deny that it was still abridged? Rolls with the breaching method employs rolls with slavery, North and South. See, everyone missed how each age of fact-driven nature and correlation nature had correlation nature's parts to victim predators, even as identity of the ground location, because this method knew we are not the Earth's voices, but we are too, huh? And we are that grouped because no one could speak for the plant life, the insects, the flower, and the fauna around us. Use President Obama's phrase. Most importantly, is where they have this title chief. Native Americans somewhere on YouTube say, I cannot find. I have to keep looking. That we must read each other's dreams. Now, see, if anyone had free speech, would be able to just do that honestly. And if you're doing it honestly when you fail, in other words, there are ways perfect. There's a predicate acts delivery system method manifest relative to slavery, relative to what it forced, only capable of being manifest. And these are tactically denatured, identity of the ground, identity of relation to itself, suburbs employed effectively to maintain the only means to cause positive value nature progressions, action natures, if to be rolls with examined as criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments of means to cause positive value nature progressions, action natures. Only criminal. There are things that the identities of law failed to communicate that our founders really wanted and needed us to have to communicate it for themselves, but per how they were each themselves sickly, distinctly enslaved, fact nature oriented, individually grouped and together. Science is tactically ulterior from that one which is hyper native pure. And then it was sustained, a breaching method against the Native Americans before the colonies were even in there, entrenched. Now there's the entrenched colonies, north and south, sickly distinctly entrenched with slavery, with the design of the suburbs. Since before our founding parents were born, that's still being and having been, that's still having been sustained against Native Americans. It is most probable and most practical to theorize, let alone to convict, that they had been separated from what their words would have been and would be now, just as we have. And we are increasingly so being having been. And there are increasingly apparent, even when real, motivations. They're effectively being having been used to keep out the most important one, which is the breaching method. which is one of the things that we know is true always with regarding that sick nature, sickly distinctly against everyone, especially where we could discern it most, where they put color in. We have black pupils, whites of eyes, we know, but we never have this juxtaposed with the conversation because that brings up and stays in nature that is not as criminal insidious in its nature, with uses of positive and negative. Because nature's nature in the value of that shows simultaneously conjunction to positive and negative. Where and how that's how it shows us. One of the ways it shows us the increasing value of being able to discern how and why. The identity of the hypersimultaneous needs to be discerned distinctly from other identities of sequence/simultaneous nature, such as the individual, such as the group, such as group locations, areas, ages, sexes. I have to contemplate it. In other words, but invisible, but still discernible. Comes with the hyper invisible, but still discernible. It comes with, as hyperconjunction to all things, vaccines. But this is per logic that uses what we know is true always, not denying the slightest sequence shift. Not, I mean, or I mean, not denying the slightest detail left out, or having been left out, or value left out, or value having been left out, regardless of motivations. So there's a quality of fact-keeping nature regarding Native American, the value of Native American history, understanding it. One reason that stayed, for example, one reason that had stayed grammar school or middle school logic, playground logic, and I'm not even worse, fake playground logic typed in to make it look like playground were other than that's what it's been originally and still. Other locations. This is a breaching method that knew how to use our locations as America, as other countries, remotely from other countries, by investing in individuals, grouped, and human, anyone who's going to speak for humanity's voicings, or the voicings of the creatures around us. They're either going to do it tactically wrong, or counter it to it tactically wrong as a raise, also with exceptions, also inclusion, tactically to keep measuring and maintain. How nature uses exception nature to additional ways that could be made up. So nature makes the value of understanding Native American history only increasingly valuable, where it will only stay positive unto itself, where it is identity of relationship to positive and negative simultaneously, as every identity is the same way because of it. We have this one identity of volume where value is nature / nature is value. Simultaneously, it is hyperconversely nature as value / value as nature. Where and how it is simultaneous, it is invisible but still discernible to an extent, the hypersimultaneous. But awareness of this and use of it without reason, from knowing what, in other words, this is where revelations come from. But this is using how it, we have been leaving out Native American rights because we leave out hyper Native American rights too, which every country, every human being is a hyper human science. that is hypernative before the sciences became criminally foreign influenced. This is what showed the sophistication of answers that came in ancient times that revealed the campus system, its republic, and the exception nature that also valued their differences. Yin yang and alpha and omega, there are proofs that they were designed, revealed to be taught together. They're hyperaditional to each other because it is hyperaditional to itself. And where they are exception nature that appear to be in demonstration of the other, they're also being used to teach what exception nature is about. Where and how we cannot invent. We can only anything we could even invent or make up has the value additionally too of the hyper-simultaneous, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that. Not only surging through all things while as them, and from and to, number 2, 4 as while as each thing. From 2, 4, 2 from, as with, and for each thing. Boxing. It's how it is making more of itself. English was revealed to teach this. And Earth is a special difference is forced. Earth's a special difference is forced away from here. Lease of Hadith as forced space nature transfer. As a negative identity of relationship to itself. Relative to how it uses and how it is 5 identities of exception nature, simultaneously positive to themselves or not. Where and how we can discern this. And its relativity to force space nature transfer, not as death, but as all that is actually demonstrated by revelations that come from understanding. For example, slavery is unnatural, except for how as criminal insidiousness nature. A kindergarten kid could understand that. See, but we hadn't employed other things, others and ourselves blamed for the breaching method measured and maintained, so that if anyone would try to counter even any group, they would not be able to be an identity of independence and or of unity. You know, there was grouped or independent. They wouldn't be able to defend that voice and counter properly things like criminal foreign influences. And they would self-value being shown how to wrongly, even when correctly. This employed all strangers to roles to use as the voices of the ground, as our voices of ourselves. We are the voice of the ground of ourselves in that group too, simultaneously. Everything's in demonstration of the value of understanding. In other words, this is its identity of relationship to itself, the human value / value progression, where and how we are a quality of diffusion that is greater than and more finite than. And while as the value, we are as a value progression. In other words, actively, with instances rather. So computers work with memory, instances, and locations. Hyper-additionally, tactical terrier from how it is hyper-additional as science. And they have to mimic this. And so they have to value debates. For every science has this phenomenon, but actually we exploit it as an identity of volume. But again, where volume equals value as nature / nature as value. and nature as value slash value as nature. Hyper, conversely. And that means with hyper additional, our care and contemplation and prayer per definition of it, per pantheism, from before pantheism became tactically, criminally foreign influenced. And that's sustained consciously to have that remembered as semi-ancient history by the semi-ancients already individually grouped and together, forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded, and worse, syntactically defenses of voicings as individuals grouped and for and as the only voice of the human species body of volume, now criminally foreign influence, self-valued criminally foreign influence, and per uses of that remotely, not just towards the known, unknown, and increasingly discovered or discoverable, but per uses of all that remotely, and more and worse, that kept and keeps that the outcome that seems more subtle, nothing, at other locations. Time, uses of all investigations, all investigators, all perception. Overt criminal enterprises, same thing. Private ones, same things. Time, insidiousness of individuals A through Z, with opinion nature relevant to this, acting and speaking, leaving out the significance, having left out the significance of other things, others, and ourselves blamed for what really caused and causes and keeps the worst negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. And what they cause, blamed on other things, others, ourselves, even when correctly, as collusions, as uses of the location /s. The breaching method is a singular use of all locations, north and south. It had the slavery sickly, distinct, non-distinctly roles with slavery through other identities that force roles with what it was doing through ourselves, here, there, everywhere. The human volume science is voice, syntax, therefore function. We have been. If any person tries to use short words properly, how they get away with this is how they've been from the youngest ages, from off all locations. They sustained it consciously, knowing overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and other natures of insidiousness at all locations were, and are still manifest. That was a better than perfect city system since before computer databases. They left out the significance of that when they're pretending passions and emotions too, for example, regarding the validity of online contracts, agreeing to what when you click a button. They have rights to lie and to establish people not known as police and their motivations for their narratives, leaving out what's actually being and having been recorded. Don't forget how sick that method was and stayed. And see, when you wanted to call someone a name or ignore it when they're called a name when someone says it still is. Anyone who tries to defend what New Yorkers are standing up against, especially the ones, especially differentially, because the ones really hurt most by no one's going to hear their voice. And no one, they never heard science, but they heard fake science. If you have black pupils and whites of eyes, you know there was a breaching method. Part of the logic is being and having been left out. It has been left out. The breaching method measured and maintained through our own. Before it did that again, did it through other countries. Countries individually grouped in together, already having self-value, uses of their identities for a science other than the human species bodies of volume science, and where and how we are species distinct from other species also is part of the evidence proof of the increasing needs for distinction and discernment to discern the identity of the hyper simultaneous. Apart from with the discernment of the distinct, non-distinct, how non-distinctly bound, being an individual, simultaneously being grouped areas, locations, ages, sexes. This is the electrical engineering, not just of positive and negative. I'm not an electrical engineer. And that's one of the things I would aspire to be. I was like, but in other words, I found out by accident when I was a kid about polarity, different ways, even with the magnet, with real life. See, and I figured out how everyone gets. In other words, if any one of the species body denies that the suburbs, let alone the cities, so we're going to use the cities because it's easier to discern, are tactically criminally foreign influenced, and that was used remotely. Well, they could, even if they want to deny that now is being used remotely, their logic is going to have inherent to it, active to it, and increasingly reliant upon aspects, quality, and nature, discernibly, for example, valuing being and having been blamed on other things, others, or ourselves. Such a simultaneously overt / insidious things associated with topics like slavery, which is and uses of it. In other words, and what's hyper evidential, denied its significance, how this has been gotten away with, there means hyper evidentially to show, only capable of being, because only capable of having been, too. Every modern country's legal precedents and statutes and uses of that can't defend itself and afford the short words and revelations, let alone their protraction. And because it is a conversation about and as nature, not just because it is there's three hyper additionally ways. In other words, where and how it is two. There's always everything that is generated. This is what the ancients would teach, more probable and increasingly demonstrable. Everything that is generated, even the smallest thing, smallest part of the smallest thing, while it is as itself, it has two other identities of possession as itself. That identity that makes more of itself as the identity of forever nature. That is space / existence as one body of volume. Hyper invisible but still discernible, where and how it has an identity that is greater than and more finite than, while as its parts. And where and how. you know, vaccines are such. Thank you. No, someone, if this week how we could fix the world, because we could just mean stack if we just agree. There are, the hyper evidential, just the fact that there are nuclear weapons, through and how long there have been nuclear weapons, let alone whatever they have. Even needs to shoot machine guns still, and we're still in the trap that before our founders were even born, and right through their lifetimes, it was still entrenched, and roles with that were forced measured who was behind what really led up to the American Revolution. It wasn't taxes, all of that. It was that how they had to counter extort everyone to force them to pretend those were the motivations. To have the audacity to go against crazy collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, interbranch exceptions tied to them, like prisons, like medical, at the same time, like campus, like the at the locations with the instances they're having to react to, as they knew humanity would have to act to the to negative value nature progressions, acts and natures, as fact human nature, that would have to do so, leaving out the significance of this breaching method already being and having been involved with all instances and uses of them, where it counts, where and how we are fact human nature oriented. And again, this is from a bridge systems, not just America. Regardless of what country it is, the individually grouped and together made themselves value that too. How grouped. It is now a discussion and nature that can't afford. Nature's nature and the value of that, how it is only increasing, and with the value of sequence true before this, and the value of that extent we know beyond. That has not come, that is value here. We know when New York City was developed, before it was developed, the breaching methods set up the suburbs, North America and South America. All they had was wagons. They tactically denatured the ground to force mass agriculture needed. There are proofs that one of the reasons asparagus is one of the only perennial vegetables was for how they forced everyone to a method that could force, measure, and maintain through our own as countries, as archetypal criminal enterprises, forced to self-value roles. Other ways, forcing that for the relativity of it, as actually actualized, and relative to the significance of leaving out how we were all once hyper Native American. I mean, how we were all once hyper humanity science. Being an individual is being a distinct identity of sequence nature. And while it's being a simultaneous nature. And where and how actually properly description is of how we are grouped and of how we are humanity. And so if someone tries to speak about this, and if someone tries to leave out names regarding all the evidences that any individual has, to know because we naturally forgive people, because for other motivations, natures, needs, interests, they confess. They keep uses of simple revelations, like when slavery comes up, has to do with our side's roles with a breaching method that was still entrenched. That was not just using all the corruption at the locations that it forced only capable of being, only allowed to be even at the same time, again, through our own needing more motivations, nature's needs, interest apparent to increasingly keep its own from being discerned. Not one has learned boxing. So the evidence is we have to stay with the simultaneous. We're going to leave out how the suburbs are tactically denatured. And that simultaneously is with demonstration of the cities. Unfathomably tactically denatured. Torture involved. Designed to prevent religious rights while simultaneously pretending other. Designed for distinct methods and natures of torture, fact-keeping nature-oriented predicate acts. More than it is about what is about racism, or is it not? Even racism and reparations are employed to be measured and maintained. Collusions, not to help. In other words, we should give money, especially people in New York City, in that trap. No matter any culture, in other words, then if you're black, you go through campuses. Of course, then they're labeling the history. They're measuring and maintaining it called Black history. It's all right if the individual wants to call it Black history. In other words, they have a formal representation of the law, overt criminal enterprises and private ones, speaking about things like family, neighbors, morality. They're saying and doing things at locations to keep things gone before courts, to go before police forms that are going to leave out details. They're going to value how used and how he's been used. Was the right to lie? Used for where they don't have the right to lie. And where they have originally instilled. In other words, certain type of victim slash predator, hyper victim slash predator at the same time. That people A through Z, including the branches of government, including especially with exception tied to them, acting for and as them too. And for example, the real causes of time delays, and for the impositions of, and the relativity of the impositions in the first place. Because we have originally still they made criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and of negative treatments syntactically defended simultaneously to consciously maintain defended uses of the identities, the names of the identities of the countries by themselves and fighting with each other or for peace. Uses of words like peace with criminal insidiousness natures, definitions of it. So not a single human voice is allowed to be heard unobstructed. So they have been using Facebook and their apparent their defenses of their logic regarding how they feel, how pretend to feel, simultaneously regarding what people say online, leaving out the significance of what came first, and or to probe dishonestly, though. You know, people are dishonestly speaking to be against crimes as people that know that they're shown needs to hide how they're already involved with fact-keeping nature-oriented predicate acts methods. How this is stayed is how they have each age of fact-keeping nature exploited at every location by a singular way. They made a whole bunch of other ways, needing time to hide collusions with that. And through other motivations, natures, needs, interests, increasingly also coordinated, that I would rather get caught for than get caught for that too. Or to invest together because they don't, no one's going to speak with the quality of fact. That's what you're being told from the youngest stages. A predicate acts delivery system method. You're told to blame the causes of it on other things, others or self, and or with delusions, and or they attach that person who told you correctly to change fake words, change words, and worse. Then ask people conversations about fake conversations. Get and then they make up things about that too. In other words, there is being enforced quality of fact, human nature formally that we can't get over. No one wants to be have collusions with it, but they already had them. They are increasingly with their worst patients and criminals and employees as the interbranch and exceptions tied to them, and as their roles with the worst criminal enterprises, foreign and domestic military, medical doctors, predators role covering up each other's and group foreign and domestic, attaching little kids and their family members to fake locations, fake ties with themselves and with others. Remote uses of the distinct natures of courts like probate courts, timed uses of elderly homes, timed uses of children's abusers forced, specifically to keep effectively used remotely criminally foreign influence forensics locations, military locations, computer locations, roads, all along roads and routes, all along intercampuses, inter and intra campuses. And the same with them inter and intra campuses in the cities and intercities. And uses of that they knew, effectively propagated, self cultivated roles, needs, and natures, blaming other things, others, yourselves. So the verbiage, or the naming of it, reparations, is blaming out other things, others, yourselves. It's all right. Just switch the name. They should be paid money. Don't blame other things, other selves. Don't keep the exceptions allowed to be used to deny, which if we met as this nature, the whole world will help us because they want the help too. Russia, America, and Ukraine, they would rather help India, China, and the rest of the world figure out how we're going to do this because we're reliant upon mass farming, for example. We're reliant upon a conversation with nature regarding finite details, group details, and together details that's not compatible with sense and sensibilities and manners towards the people of the industries. Every single one of them. There is a problem that there's not any worms. How many years have we mowed with the tactically denatured suburbs lawns since before our founders were born? And took away all the food that goes into the water. For the earth is living too. Its method of teaching us about positive and negative is simultaneously so we understand about the difference between criminal and seriousness natures of positive treatments, especially criminal and seriousness natures of positive treatments, negative treatments that are simultaneously collusions. And wherever there's a positive or negative treatment, there's an identity treatment. In nature's, what's actually nature true always. Its identity is inseparable, not just from all things, but from every part of itself, individually grouped too, and together. Yeah, species body. Here means appear. So, in other words, let's set it up that way. Let's stop. In other words, not just to stop war. In other words, because the war is a proof. All sides have state logic. In other words, with the suburbs, they've been child abused while their parents and their elderly were being abused. That the VA, the American Veteran Affairs offices and locations, all identities are on and off of the place, except states too. They cannot defend that and afford defenses of what New York City is set up as. For example, the suburbs, let alone New York City, by a breaching method. All exception nature and demonstration is the same thing. In fact, would rather hide that and or get caught for it rather than allow anyone to show how it's connected to the breaching method singular. Because it reveals the quality of fact human nature that education was supposed to reveal for us. That comes with understanding what our founders actually communicated for us to understand, which begins with understanding why and how they had to counter-extort the other founders. And they had to give them narratives to make up, to pretend that this was the real reason that they came together for revolution. And to pretend that the other reasons were those that led to the unfolding of Marbury versus Madison, deciding that real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice, not denying the slightest sequence shift. Finite details left out, made up, especially as collusions with a breaching method, singular, one that effectively propagated and maintained self-cultivated. Fact, human nature-oriented predicate acts collusions, and with the counters to it. Keeping blame on other things, others, ourselves, too. Increasingly relevant. Very simple. I could have told you all American history by now. A sustained predicate acts delivery system method was against the Native Americans. Separated them from what they had already completely criminally re-engineered and only remembered by the colonists. So they couldn't defend their logic without breaking down elements of the Native American that they were still in possession of as nature. In other words, as fact human nature. They couldn't have known, because then it would reveal. Nature reveals to us. Nature gave us black pupils, whites of eyes, to know that the laws regarding slavery were criminally foreign influence that were employed to measure and maintain roles, colluding with or not with the breaching method that could effectively measure and maintain that from abroad through members here as individuals, as natures, individually grouped in together as criminal and citizens natures, regardless if the one's more positive or negative. And the exceptions, uses of exception nature, where we are fact human nature, uses of it tactically ulterior from how nature needs us to use it. So, nature shows us the value of understanding a breaching method was sustained against Native Americans before our founding parents were even born. And they didn't want that. And it was already it had already been sustained upon the countries, the colonizing, the names of the colonizing lands that colonized North and South America and set up the suburbs sickly distinctly, rose with slavery north and south. For example, that sickly distinctly against everyone. Not just how they put it, sickly distinctly against black. Two simultaneously, so they could measure it sickly distinctly against everyone, not blamed as that, and or Rose blaming other things other ourselves for what it did and does relative to that as means to discern. You'll see with the short words, let alone with the long words, of those who summarize his history, of those who make convictions, summarize the sciences. You'll see with their fact, cheap nature, quality aspects in nature. Criminally foreign influence, fact, cheap nature, quality aspects in nature. Self value, relied upon by their logic. And how they get away with that logic, you'll see simultaneously individual voices have effectively been prevented, censored through our own. And it has to change word fakes words through motivations with people for, relative to magic tricks and relative to where and how everyone agrees to have the court settle things where that leaves out their roles. And when it's not their roles too, it's differentially criminally foreign influence increasingly perfectly. In other words, the databases all had roles, and roles entertaining that. There's a certain type of psychopath for the dictionary definition of it. I'm not a doctor. There are doctors recorded since before founding who've been faking conversations with people. Delusions are criminally foreign influence tied to the courts and the police forms, kept with their worst patients and criminals. Need to defend, needs through other motivations, needs interests other than our parent for where really why. It's also how. It is important to understand how they keep other things, others, ourselves blamed for what is true always. A breaching method employed slavery. Every modern history is about a breaching method too, because of how it is hyper additional to itself only, too, and how these selves they force us our syntax to entertain ourselves as how it leaves the significance of this out. So it is the identity that was true before the smallest finite detail of the republic now. And that shows. And so its identity is the one showing us the increasing value. If you want to understand America's founders, you need to understand the breaching method first was sustained against Native Americans. You have to understand the motivations for roles with that could only have come through that same breaching method already having captivated the same way we know it does. For example, forcing mass farming and or the exceptions to be heard too. Because now it's from a nature that's still tactically denatured. It's a tactically denatured identity of relationship to itself too, the ground. Its identity of relationship to the water, the oxygen, to the discernment of that identity of sequence slash simultaneous nature. That phototropism is in demonstration of. For example, but being an ism is a science that is about the invisible but still discernible. So they have it wrong. They have the hyper invisible left out. And when they leave the hyper invisible out, they only have it valued as criminal and citizen's nature. Uses of our country's names. Uses of our country, other countries' names. Uses of wars, the names of wars. You know, well, I read this. Oh, this I know this because my family member was in this war or that war. And so everyone's making group uses that are tactical terror. Everyone wants what they call debate. They want us to, have courts settle it then. You know how long people have said things at locations? Including the courts that had to highlight progressions too. The police forms, plural, involved with this. Overt criminal enterprise, private ones, insidiousness A through Z. Forgiveness is because it's what's fluent from the groupthink. We were also told through the Bush administration, rightly, groupthink was involved with what led up to the World Trade Center attack. Of course it was. The breaching method employed uses of forced roles or the debate, even the debates, what they call debate regarding American history, regarding amendments. You can't make proper history treatment of amendments if you don't understand how and why our founders had to counter-extort the other founders, how and why they had to make them pretend motivations other than were their actual motivations, which were put up as a screen to defend our founders and to defend those who they allowed no defense, would have no defense other if they did not help our founders. They had to counter-extort them as our founders. It was about overcoming slavery. It was way more than taxes. It was about having people forcing people to pretend they were only against taxes. But the breaching method was measuring, maintaining, even who had roles doing that. That's why they had no choice but to fight the revolution and win. See, but then they had to leave the North and the South to fight with each other. Knowing that the North and South were still roles with slavery. But now they would have to do it as fact human nature. But they knew that would call them out as fact human nature punks. But they never fathomed how they would get the extent they'd be able to get away with that because of the extent of how that could be self-valued by victims of it / hyper victims of it. for how that's been suffered. We can't leave out the relevant. There's certain type of child abuse, voice that you're only allowed to hear, or they change that person's words, fake that person's words, put fake things with the news media at the same time, doing the same thing, so the person could have no voice. They pretend passions and emotions regarding what people say online, or that's hateful or racist, or that's that, and that's that, because they have all these members of all these differences being and having been employed. They have KKK themed, black themed roles with on off interbranch offices, Connecticut, on off legal cases, on off campuses, roles with child abuses, on off elderly homes that are connected. There are remote uses of the investigations and of the investigators of such caused by such, and of the investigations of that, effectively used to measure and maintain effective collusion, singular, to all natures of the other ones. So there is a certain nature of shock and awe, which is another phrase we were given through the news media, that is also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Their influence to pretend it's personal, pretend passions and emotions like it's personal if you bring up bad things they did. And in other words, try to ask them to fix the fake conversations with us, attaching little kids to fake locations, fake words, uses of their Facebook page, uses of their posting their fake articles, fake outcomes of legal cases they pretended, fake conversations with that. They also attach the victims of the legal cases to that won those cases. They still have roles with before that because these are names on off campuses that have been spreading lies with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, killers, people next to the body dumping spots. The same ones timed out of the state judicial branch offices through time, Connecticut, out of the state. These are the same ones involved New York City. This one with a certain type of victim slash hyper victim. They want to be referred to as a predator, leaving out how as a victim. Because the breaching method is influencing that. So they've been switching names into branch. There have been roles with instances effectively used to keep all locations criminally foreign influence, used criminally foreign influence while pretending other, not just for themselves and from apparent motivations, but with those ones no one wants, but everyone keeps increasingly valuing because of the predicate acts methods that is against each age. While self-value rolls with it, because everyone missed it. Because everyone misses how each age of factory nature is going to have to respond to the real causes of negative value nature, precautions, acts, and natures. The breaching method knew they would have to, as factory nature not knowing how to properly. And they knew how effectively to exploit that. So we're going to instantly give better than means to better than just injunctive reliefs. I'm not a lawyer. And we're going to call them injunctive reliefs. We're not going to call them reparations. If we call them reparations, they must be drawn relative to the private and individual bodies associated with slavery as Americans. We could do and this, but this is not just against. See, like this is with psychiatry, has a whole bunch of money and predicate acts and methods, roles, and natures that we could use, as the hyper evidential, to additionally, with other artistic means, to pay for the injunctive reliefs. needed for the people of all the ground locations, let alone New York City, cities across the world. The human species volume science is in a trap. We have people behind what they call debates regarding nuclear weapons, and they're using words like isms. Even phototropism, for example, a plant moving towards the light. It isn't demonstration itself of the five identities of sequence nature / simultaneous nature. Simultaneously three ways bound, two. And with the value of sequence before the three, and with the extent we know beyond this, is value coming to while as it now. What is distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper-simultaneously each thing, vaccine. So, it's not just to end war. You don't put a physic as our agenda first. Don't put it's all right to put reparations if you want to aim it at the slavery rules. Worse than criminal incompetence. Kept blamed on other things other than ourselves, and with physical delusions, nature delusions, and identity delusions. I'm not a doctor even. Three just distinct natures of delusions I'm discerning. I didn't even read this in the dictionary, but nature shows us means to discern this. And so that it is inherent, active, and progressive to the logic of people also with respect to they have blind respect to the experts on logic. Part of the way they've gotten involved with it, they've gotten away with it, was because of predicate acts, methods, roles, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones that also courts have and their family members. And that sustained so long, and they knew they would have whole methods of them roles. And they could increasingly be shown how it needs to hide that, because they increased the breaching method, knew that increasingly nature would demonstrate that. Give me people means to demonstrate that. And so they show them those people and make them know their names before they know theirs, and without knowing their names. And they attach everyone to fabricated audio and video, fake locations, fake ties to complete spree strangers, fake ties to other people, fake natures of ties to other people. And this is increasingly exploited. We have increasingly self-valued uses of, quote, right to lie by James Comey, also one of the FBI, involved also with Ian, and a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, as one of the people involved with a way worse than just the fishing expedition of January 6th treatments. Also effectively being used to cover up and preemptively to hide in the future what is actively actually recorded at all formal / informal evidence data reception locations relative to this. The first vaccines. So the science is sharing identity where they appear not to is where and how is a particular method of contemplation, and that the ancients called prayer, other than is referred to now. And it's using contemplation if something is going to be is positive to those things truly at all time, always at the same time. Like if you have an opinion or a conviction regarding American history, if it's not if it leaves out the significance of the fact that a breaching method was applied against each of the Native Americans, sickly distinctly, and that had been sustained before our founders were even born, before their parents were even born. If it leaves that out, the significance of that out, it's got criminally foreign influence, and simultaneously delusions raw, qualities, aspects, and factual nature, values in nature, and identity treatments that can't defend itself and afford to pretend to understand the logic of the short words of anyone around them. And necessary. They can't afford the nature necessary to be. That is necessary to counter the real causes of criminal foreign influences, the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts natures, avocations, acts like predicate acts, natures like criminal insidiousness natures, wrongdoers, wrongdoing itself. Boxings, I teach us things, the species body, long. Boxings, come on. So the FBI and Connecticut State Police and Vermont State Police, Rhode Island State Police have roles with people from Weathersfield, intercities, on off the state judicial branch offices, involved with people at other locations, like on off two route highway through time with a whole bunch of people, involved making fake exceptions of knowings to people through time. So two times there was a stranger named Brian Bone, and one time he said they influenced the intelligence community and people associated with the intelligence community from off his family and with people associated with that, no mine, I don't know his, theirs, and people with his neighbors influenced him to roles with ecstasy or not ecstasy, acid, and one time, the other time it was mescaline. And it has something to do with people all along Route 3, too, which goes right by the state judicial branch offices and with the town lines. So, and with like where there's a Zano place now, and there used to be an Arch Pizza there, has something to do with the intelligence community involved with interstates, as the people with a whole bunch of different countries timed roles with stacking predicate acts in campuses and acting off campuses where there are roles with criminally foreign influence uses of time treatments at interbranch locations where there are simultaneously roles stacking predicate acts into interbranch databases and or differentially also relevant where they have doing other database locations like prisons tied to them, fire campuses, other medical law campuses, type things, like with Sandy Hook, Newtown. So, in other words, all gather brown boxings. Sandy Hook, Newtown has a whole bunch of medical corruption roles, and with people with child abusers of campuses that also have prison courts names, and a whole bunch of identities at their locations, and a whole bunch of different police forms, and their personal roles of forming domestic doctors and uses of people involved with uses of corners of streets, effectively used to keep people's sense and sensibility. For example, this only time I ever saw a real short John Mayano. What's his name? Joel on Weathersfield campus. They made a fake exception after he graduated, which is also why I stayed back was associated with a teacher. I never had a personal conversation with her. She made confessions and she has roles with people from Washington D.C. in the World Trade Center and Central Connecticut State University, involved with a whole all these different natures of countries in the news and our own side, even the military, foreign and domestic, leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and sense, as people involved with predicate acts on and off campuses, and with uses of parks involved, uses of the Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Transportation. So we need to get them. They've been switching it. I have been asking for a response in paper. They switched near the hate of principal child abusers' confessions by fabricating a whole bunch of evidences with the Wethersfield police, with a whole bunch of different police forms at the same time through time. There's a Demora family, and they have neighbors of theirs from year that involved with other locations since before they moved in there. They had been involved with people on and off the campuses, and one that used to be there. Involved with them also at the corner of Knott Street. And also a guy pointed to a bean non-verbally at a Sandra Spada's house as one of the people involved with probate court judges and families next to schools, involved with the people that are countering drugs and medicines crimes. They have collusions with them. Also with the people that run prisons, people that run fire campuses, their family members, where they go home to. This is use of all locations. Then they hide that at parks. Sharks! In other words, thank you. Get so who disbelieves? That way we can get to. We have to have this law where we could say who disbelieves, and we have to get a name on paper so we could address them. Because they've been forging names and switching names, using instances, criminally foreign influence readings of statutes, foreign and domestic collusions, use of the exception nature. Here, they even have proof so that there was medical corruption that was tied to courts and tied to abuses of Adam Lanza and his family, and then them forced self-value roles because they force equality of fact-keeping nature. These are people that have been attaching kids in their families to fake conversations with themselves. The news media recorded, demonstrated, confirmed they have an extent of consciousness, conscious awareness of how they've been using the words like parents rather than families to keep out what's actually recorded, going down, having gone down, and the difference between police forms that are parents and not. So we have police forms that have the difference of how they are family members at the same time. They're coaching their kids to hide life progressions for their roles with uses of intercities campuses, like people with the name O'Neill, with the police forms with state police of Wethersfield Police. Involved also at Whiting Forensics with O'Neill, people with men and women with O'Neill, also with Wethersfield and West Hartford campuses with child abusers forced, and roles with the counters, attaching victims to fake conversations with themselves and about things that really happened themselves, and saying it wrong, saying fake things, as the roles with collusion with perpetrators. These are doctors that were crimes with their patients and criminals online before they got caught. The news media has been bringing up if people like things or not on Facebook, and they've been bringing up uses of words like mental health to hide and measure and maintain, not realize their roles with predicate acts, with their whole wire crime methods, with the people with their phones tied to the predicate acts, with their broadcasts, attaching kids and their families to fake locations, fake ties to other people, fake natures of ties to other people, fake uses of drugs, fake ties, fake uses of alcohol. Uh, they even get themselves involved with exceptions, like someone, in other words, criminally foreign influence, delusions, raw from backgrounds. They increasingly have to pretend other by pretending that it's just legitimate news. They know this is true. Now these are the people with the interbranch that have been forging and switching names. They have roles with various natures of federal criminals and killers and people next to the body dumping spots with increasingly ties to that and timed uses of it, like with the people on and off Two Rod Highway, associated with the Faenza family and his extended family members. Also on off the state judicial branch offices, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, all along Route 3, and with spots next to the state capitol, rolls with a Dillon family, with child abuses and child abusers, and people intercity, on and off with the people associated with courts and FBI and other police forms, on and off Elm Streets in Weathersfield and in Rocky Hill, and associated with this. And then with the interbranch switching names, forging names, involved with child abusers, people involved with New York, with Rhode Island through time, and with the various natures of it. Get them onto paper, please. Because they even the journalism, you can't just call up, say, please fix the fake conversations you put me in. And then they're changing the articles and they're putting up different things. Then if I say it, then in other words, I want that. In other words, we need to how they're doing that too, because those are roles with predicate acts at other locations. That's not legitimate news information. They have roles with all along Route 3. They have more involved. They have a Roger Suzanne involved with federal evidence as crimes, coaching little kids to roles. But see, this is also probably them coaching Suzanne into roles too. And the difference is also exploited because these are people involved at interbranch locations planting predicate acts, also at judges with child offenders. Get a response for the principal child abusers' confessions too, and all the fake information they told to the Weathersfield parents and families and citizens regarding what I caught them doing with the principal child abuser and the people at Knott Street involved with the Spada family judges and the Della Fera family judges and the Colella family involved with wire crimes and Weatherfield police. Let's go. Let's get on paper with the interbranch on paper. Let's go. Let's go with the fire departments too. You have Weathersfield Pizza. Let's go. They have all these campuses too. People with this Violet families. Watch. Make them get on paper now. Make sure they get a name too, one name, one sequence, and on time. Don't delay anymore because they're keeping it between campuses. That's what's